Why did the mess hall go silent the moment she walked in? No alarm, no shouted order, just the sudden stillness that falls when everyone senses something wrong, something human. It was a humid morning at Fort Haven, the kind that made uniforms cling and tempers short. Soldiers filled the mess, laughing, swapping stories, the metallic clink of trays echoing through the long hall. Coffee steamed. Boots thudded. For a moment, it felt like the war outside their gates had stayed away. Then Sergeant Claire Mendes stepped through the door. The laughter thinned. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Mugs hovered half-raised. She didn't need to say a word, the bruises said enough. Her right cheek was swollen, purple fatting to yellow. A cut split her lower lip. She tried to smile, that soldier's automatic defense, but it trembled instead, betraying her. Her left hand trembled slightly as she lifted a tray, and she moved carefully, like someone trying not to break the silence that had already shattered inside her. No one met her eyes. No one wanted to. At the far end of the hall sat General Roth. Rigid posture, silver hair cropped short, medals gleaming against the dull green of his uniform. A man carved from decades of command, known for cold efficiency and zero tolerance for weakness. But in that instant, something behind his expression shifted. He didn't blink. He didn't sip his coffee. He simply stared, the kind of stare that weighed and measured and found something terribly wrong. She kept walking, past tables of men she'd trained with, past the laughter that had died in their throats. Each step echoed louder, heavier, like boots on a parade ground. Her face stayed composed, but her eyes, there was a flicker there. Shame, maybe, or fear, or both. When she passed the third table, someone whispered, too softly for the words to reach her, but the pity in the tone did. Her shoulders tightened. Then Roth spoke. Sergeant Mendes stepped forward. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a rifle crack. Every head turned. Claire froze, her fingers clenched around the tray. For a heartbeat, she looked like she might not move at all, like she'd rather vanish into the floor. But training won over fear. She straightened, turned, and marched forward. Boots against tile. One sound in a room that had forgotten how to breathe. She stopped in front of the general's table, her back straight, her eyes fixed somewhere over his shoulder, the perfect soldier's stance. But her pulse was hammering so hard she thought it might betray her. "Who did this to you?" Roth's tone was calm, almost too calm. Claire's throat tightened. She didn't move, didn't blink. "Sir, She tripped during training, sir." The voice came from 2 tables behind her. Smooth, casual, Captain Doyle. He rose from his seat with that easy arrogance some officers wear like armor. His uniform was crisp, his smirk practiced. "Nothing serious," he added, gesturing vaguely with his mug. "She's fine." Roth's head turned slowly toward him. The shift in the room's air was palpable, like static before lightning. "Then why," Roth said quietly, "do you look so nervous, Captain?" A murmur rippled through the hall. Doyle forced a laugh. "Nervous? Not at all, sir, just—" The sound of Roth's palm slamming against the metal table drowned him out. The clang echoed like a shot. His wedding ring struck the surface with a sharp, metallic note that silenced even breath. "You think I don't know a cover-up when I see one?" The hall froze. For a moment no one moved. Even the air seemed to stop. Claire's heart was in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She'd spent months hiding the truth behind rehearsed explanations, training accidents, equipment malfunctions, clumsy slips. Anything but the real story. Because the real story could end a career, hers most of all. She could still feel the sting of Doyle's last outburst, the shove against the wall, the cold threat whispered between clenched teeth. "You tell anyone, and I'll make sure they think you're unstable." She had believed him. Until now. Roth stood slowly. The chair scraped back, the sound heavy and final. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe it was the way he carried himself, like the weight of command had fused with his bones. "Outside," he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The authority in it was absolute. The soldiers parted as they walked. Claire followed, her chest tight. Doyle trailed behind, his smirk fading now, eyes flicking toward the exits, calculating. They stepped into the yard. The morning sun was harsh, unforgiving. Dust swirled around their boots as the wind stirred. A handful of soldiers gathered by the mess hall doors, watching. No one spoke. Roth faced Doyle squarely. "You laid hands on one of my soldiers," he said. "One of my people. You think your rank protects you." Doyle's jaw set. "You have no proof, sir." For a moment even Roth didn't answer. The silence stretched, long, taut, dangerous. Then Claire moved. She didn't speak, she didn't look at Doyle, she simply lifted her sleeve. The bruises weren't just on her face. They climbed up her arm, dark, cruel, and unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the watching soldiers. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Permission to speak, sir." Roth nodded once. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry, "I didn't want to ruin his reputation. I thought it would end my career. But I can't keep pretending anymore." For the first time her mask cracked. Tears glistened but didn't fall. Roth's face hardened, not in anger but in something deeper, disappointment. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't curse, just cuts straight to the soul. He turned to his aide. "Escort Captain Doyle to the provost's office. Effective immediately, he's relieved of duty pending investigation." Doyle's face went pale. "Sir, this is—" "Enough," Roth snapped. As the MP stepped forward, Doyle tried to protest again, but no one listened. He was led away through the dust, his boots dragging slightly as though the earth itself resisted him. When he disappeared around the corner, Roth turned back to Claire. The wind caught the edge of the flag above them, red, white, and blue rippling softly in the sun. "No soldier stands alone under my command," he said quietly. "Do you understand that, Sergeant?" Her lips trembled. "Yes, sir." He nodded once. "Then start healing, we'll take care of the rest." She stood there, the weight of months lifting slowly from her shoulders. Around them, soldiers watched in silence, not out of pity, but respect. The kind that changes how a person is seen. Because in that moment, Claire Mendes wasn't just the woman with bruises. She was the one who had stood there, unflinching, as the truth came into the light. And Roth, the man once called stone-hearted, had reminded everyone what real leadership looked like. As the crowd began to disperse, whispers spread across the base. By noon, every barracks knew the story. By sunset, it had reached the far perimeter posts. Soldiers spoke about it quietly, almost reverently, as though something sacred had happened, something fragile and rare. Courage, they called it. But Roth knew it wasn't courage alone. It was something more painful, the breaking point where fear gives way to honesty. He had seen it before, in battlefields and confession rooms, but never like this. Never so close to home. That night he sat in his quarters, staring at his reflection in the dark window. He remembered his wife, the way she'd once touched the bruise beneath her eye and said it was her fault. He'd believed her then. He hadn't wanted to see. Now, years later, in a dusty base far from home, he had finally seen. And he couldn't unsee it. Outside, the lights of the base flickered. Somewhere, a generator hummed. The world moved on. But inside Roth's chest, something shifted, something long dormant stirring awake. Maybe justice wasn't about rules and ranks. Maybe it was about moments like this, when a man could choose to look away or to act. He exhaled slowly. Tomorrow there would be paperwork, hearings, and politics. But tonight, for the first time in years, General Roth allowed himself to feel proud, not of his command, not of his medals, but of one soldier who refused to hide anymore. And of himself, for finally not being blind. Because sometimes leadership isn't about barking orders or winning wars. It's about standing up when silence feels safer. As the wind rustled through the window, his reflection seemed to whisper it back to him. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why did silence hurt more than the bruise itself? That question echoed in Claire's head as she stared at the mirror in the dim barracks bathroom. It was nearly midnight. The base had gone still, only the low hum of distant generators broke the quiet. Fluorescent light buzzed above her, flickering every few seconds. Her reflection wavered with it, a soldier's face, strong and scarred, trying to look unbroken. She dabbed ointment on the swelling along her jaw. The cold stung, then soothed. Her mind replayed the morning over and over. The moment Roth had called her name, the look on every face, the fear that her world was about to collapse. But it hadn't. Not yet. A drop of blood ran down her chin. She wiped it with a tissue, watching it bloom red against white. That color used to mean danger, now it just meant proof. Outside, boots echoed down the corridor. Two voices murmured, young, uncertain. "Did you hear what Roth did?" "Yeah, Doyle's done for." "Good, about time someone stood up." The voices faded. Claire's grip on the sink tightened until her knuckles turned white. They were talking about her, and yet they were. No one said her name. No one ever did. That's how gossip worked in the military, loud, fast, and nameless. She turned off the light and walked back to her bunk. The dorm was dark except for the faint glow of the moon through the small window. Rows of sleeping forms breathed in rhythm, the quiet chorus of exhausted soldiers. Claire lay down, staring at the ceiling. She'd thought telling the truth would make her feel lighter. It didn't. It just made the air heavier, as though the base itself was holding its breath. When she finally drifted into sleep, the dreams came fast and sharp, hands grabbing her arm, Doyle's voice like static in her ear. "You'll regret this." She jolted awake before dawn, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. For a long moment, she sat on the edge of her bed, letting the tremors pass. Then she dressed. Habit. Routine. Control. By the time the sun rose, she was outside on the training field. The air was cool, the horizon streaked in orange. She jogged the perimeter alone, boots thudding softly against the dirt path. With each lap, she tried to outrun the memory, but it followed her step for step. Halfway through, a shadow joined her. Lieutenant Harris, her old range instructor, broad-shouldered, calm eyes. He didn't say anything for the first lap. Then, "You okay?" Claire didn't slow. "I'm fine, sir." That's what every soldier says right before they fall apart. She stopped running. The words landed heavier than she expected. He sighed, wiping sweat from his brow. "Roth did the right thing, you know. Not many would've." "I didn't want anyone to do anything," she said quietly. "I just wanted it to stop." He nodded. Sometimes that's the hardest mission of all. When he walked away, she watched him go, part of her wanting to call him back, to ask how long it would take before people stopped looking at her like a story instead of a person. But she didn't. Some questions didn't have answers. Across the base, in his office, General Roth stared at a report that didn't want to be written. He'd been up since before dawn, going through personnel files, incident forms, the empty language of procedure. Every line felt like sandpaper against the truth. The door opened. His aide, Major Alina Cross, entered quietly. "Sir, the provost confirms Doyle's in holding. Command wants your written statement before 1800. Roth didn't look up. "Command," he repeated flatly. "Which command?" "Division HQ, sir." Of course. The same men who'd sent Doyle here in the first place. The same ones who'd called him a promising officer. Roth leaned back, rubbing his temples. "They'll want this buried, you know that." Cross hesitated. "They might want it handled discreetly." Discreetly, he almost laughed. "That's a polite word for silence." She lowered her voice. "With respect, sir, you went against an officer. They'll see it as insubordination." He looked up at her then, and for a moment the old fire returned, the one that used to win wars. If they think protecting a soldier is insubordination, then maybe they've forgotten what command means. Cross didn't argue. She served with him long enough to know that tone, the one that meant he'd already chosen his side. Still, when she left, Roth felt the chill settle in. He knew the politics would come. They always did. He just hadn't expected to feel this tired before the first shot was fired. He stood and crossed to the window. Outside, the flag fluttered lazily. Beyond it, the yard where it had all happened. The same patch of earth where Doyle's arrogance had crumbled and one woman's silence had ended. He exhaled slowly. Some part of him, the soldier, not the general, wanted to find her, to make sure she knew she wasn't alone in this. But another part warned him to keep distance. Fraternization, optics, regulations, words designed to choke humanity out of leadership. He sat again and began writing. At approximately 9:40 hours, observed Sergeant Mendes with visible facial injuries. The report sounded sterile, cold. But somewhere between the lines, the truth bled through, a man trying to turn an act of decency into bureaucracy. He paused halfway down the page, his pen hovered. Maybe this was why so few commanders intervened, not because they lacked empathy, but because empathy didn't fit on an official form. He signed his name anyway, bold strokes, final. That evening, Claire was called to medical for follow-up evaluation. She sat on the cot while the medic, a soft-spoken corporal, checked her bruises. The touch was gentle, professional, but it made her flinch all the same. "Sorry," the medic murmured, force of habit. "It's okay. You should take a few days off duty." "I'd rather not." He gave her a look that said he understood, even if he couldn't say it. Then at least avoid contact drills. When she left the infirmary, dusk had fallen. The base lights blinked on one by one, washing the world in pale gold. She walked without direction until she found herself by the fence line, staring out toward the empty horizon. Freedom was somewhere beyond that line. But so was everything she'd sworn to serve. Footsteps approached behind her. "Permission to join you." She turned, General Roth. Hands behind his back, posture formal, voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Sir," she said quickly, standing at attention. "At ease, Sergeant." They stood there for a moment in silence, the hum of the base faint behind them. He studied the horizon. "You're not the first soldier I've seen with bruises. Most said they came from training. Some even believed it." She glanced at him, uncertain. He went on, voice low. "I once ignored one, a corporal under my command, Afghanistan. She said she'd walked into a door. I believed her. 2 months later, she took her own life." Claire looked away, the wind stinging her eyes. "I told myself I couldn't have known," Roth said. "But the truth is, I didn't want to know. It's easier to lead when you don't look too close." He turned then, meeting her gaze. "I won't make that mistake again." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was heavy with unspoken things, guilt, gratitude, exhaustion. "Sir," she said finally, "they'll come after you for this." He smiled faintly. "Let them. My conscience can take a beating better than my soldiers can." That line almost made her laugh, but it caught in her throat. "Get some rest, Sergeant. Tomorrow you start a new chapter." He started to walk away, then paused. "And Mendes, you did the hardest part today." She frowned. "Which part was that, sir?" "Letting yourself be seen." He left her there beneath the pale light, the words echoing long after his footsteps faded. She stood still until the cold crept in. Only then did she realize how tightly she'd been holding herself, as if bracing for another hit that never came. In the days that followed, the base adjusted the way wounded bodies do, slowly, unevenly. Some soldiers avoided eye contact, others offered quiet nods in passing. The mess hall laughter never returned to full volume. Every conversation carried a shadow of what had happened. And in the command office, memos arrived, inquiries. requests for clarification, polite threats wrapped in formal language. Roth read them all, replied to none. When a colonel from HQ finally called, his words were sharp and rehearsed. "You've created unnecessary turmoil, Roth. Next time, bring concerns through proper channels." Roth simply said, "Proper channels didn't stop the bruises, Colonel." The line went dead soon after. That night, as the rain began to fall over Fort Haven, both Roth and Claire found themselves awake again. Different buildings, same silence. He sat by his desk, staring at the phone, wondering how many more lines he was willing to cross for something as fragile as integrity. She sat by the window, tracing raindrops down the glass, wondering if she'd ever be just a soldier again, not a headline, not a victim, just herself. Lightning flashed, turning the sky white. For a brief second, the whole base looked frozen in time, a photograph of pain and perseverance. And somewhere deep inside that silence, a thought stirred in both of them. This wasn't over. Because the hardest battles don't happen on foreign soil. They happen in the halls of power, in the minds of those who refuse to look away. And tomorrow, both of them would have to decide how much the truth was really worth. Why did the air around her feel colder now that the truth was out? Claire had imagined that once she spoke up, the weight would lift, that she'd feel lighter, freer. But truth, she was learning, didn't always set you free. Sometimes it just made the world quieter. 3 days had passed since the yard confrontation. The base moved like a machine again, drills, reports, patrol rotations, but something in the rhythm had changed. Laughter came in short bursts, always dying quickly. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. She pretended not to notice. That was the soldier's way. At the firing range, the smell of gunpowder steadied her. The rifle in her hands was familiar weight, one thing she could still control. Each shot cracked through the morning air with precision, rhythm, purpose. The target sheet tore neatly at center mass, again and again. But behind her she could feel eyes, watching, whispering. 2 corporals muttered near the ammo crates. She didn't catch the words, but she caught the tone, pity wrapped in discomfort. When the session ended, she cleared her weapon, packed it away, and left without a word. Outside, the sun was high, baking the concrete. She passed a group of soldiers who shifted awkwardly, their voices low. She caught fragments. "Should have kept it in-house. She ruined a career. She did what none of us would have." Each word stuck like a thorn. By the time she reached the dorms, her hands were trembling again. She sat on her bunk and stared at them. The bruises were fatting, but the ache beneath them was. When she looked up, she noticed an envelope slid under her door. Unmarked. She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single note, typed unsigned. "Not everyone thinks you're a hero. Keep your head down if you know what's good for you." Her pulse spiked. She read it twice, then folded it once, twice, until the paper felt small enough to crush in her hand. She didn't cry, didn't shout. She just sat there, jaw tight, eyes hollow. It wasn't fear anymore. It was exhaustion. In the command office, General Roth stared at a glowing screen. The message was short, precise, and infuriating. "Effective immediately. Captain Doyle is to be transferred to Division Medical for evaluation. Investigation closed. Lack of sufficient evidence." Roth read it again and again. Then he laughed once, quietly, bitterly. The sound of disbelief turned into anger. He pressed the intercom. "Cross, my office now." Major Cross appeared within a minute, tablet in hand. "Sir." "Read this." She scanned the message, her jaw tightening. "They're sweeping it." "Of course they are." He leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "They'll call it protocol. They'll say it's to avoid public damage to morale. But what it really means is make the problem disappear." Cross said nothing. The air between them was heavy with unspoken agreement. Roth stood and paced slowly toward the window. You know what happens next, don't you? They'll come for you, she said quietly. Reassignment, administrative review, something polite. He nodded once. I've made enemies before. Not like these. He turned back, eyes sharp. Then they'll learn I don't scare easy. She exhaled. Sir, you can't fight command. I'm not fighting command. He paused. I'm reminding them what it's supposed to mean. For a moment, neither spoke. Rain began to patter softly against the glass, each drop like a heartbeat. Then Roth said, almost to himself, they think soldiers are expendable, numbers on a report, but every bruise has a name, every silence costs something. He looked at Cross again. Find Sergeant Mendes, tell her I need to see her. Claire stood outside the general's office an hour later, uniform crisp, expression unreadable. When she entered, Roth was alone, no guards, no aides. Just a man behind a desk piled with paperwork he hadn't touched. Sergeant, he said, at ease. She relaxed slightly, though her shoulders stayed tense. I got word this morning, he said. They're transferring Captain Doyle to medical, declaring the case closed. Her breath caught, closed. He nodded. They'll call it inconclusive. It's their way of pretending justice was served. She looked down, her throat tightening. So that's it, he walks away. Not if I can help it. Her eyes snapped up, sir. He raised a hand. I'm not promising miracles, Sergeant, but I can promise you this, I won't let what you did be erased. For the first time, her voice wavered. With respect, sir, they'll come after you. He smiled faintly. They already are. Silence settled between them again, not empty this time, but heavy with mutual understanding. Roth leaned forward. Tell me something, Sergeant. Why didn't you come to me sooner? She hesitated. Because I didn't think it would matter. He frowned. I've seen others try, she said. They reported things, harassment, assault, abuse, and it just got buried. The ones who spoke up got labeled as problems. I didn't want to be one of them. And now, she took a deep breath. Now I'd rather be a problem than a coward. Roth's jaw tightened, admiration flickering behind his stern expression. You're not a problem, Mendes. You're a soldier who remembered the oath the rest of us keep forgetting. He stood, walking around the desk until he was beside her. Go back to your unit. Keep your head high. If anyone gives you trouble, they'll answer to me. Yes, sir. She saluted, turned, and walked out. But as the door closed behind her, Roth's expression darkened. He knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something bigger, something the army wouldn't want to see. Later that night, the rain grew heavier. The base lights shimmered through sheets of water, blurring everything into a dreamlike haze. In her quarters, Claire sat on her bunk, staring at the letter again, that anonymous threat. It felt smaller now, almost meaningless compared to the weight of what she'd lived through. But still, it bothered her. Someone had gone out of their way to intimidate her, someone who wanted her quiet. She tore it into pieces, fed them into the small trash can, and struck a match. The flame caught quickly, curling the paper into ash. She watched it burn, the light flickering across her bruised skin. The door knocked softly. She froze. Who is it? Lieutenant Harris. She opened the door. He stood there, soaked from the rain, holding a thermos. Coffee, he said with a faint smile. Thought you might need it. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in. He poured her a cup, steam rising between them. For a long while neither spoke. The rain filled the silence. Finally he said, You know, when word got out, a lot of people started watching. Not just this base. Other posts too. They're talking about you. She frowned. Talking. Yeah, some call you reckless. Others call you brave. But everyone's paying attention. You did more than you think. She stared into her coffee. Then why doesn't it feel like it? Because change doesn't feel like victory, Claire. It feels like isolation. Her eyes met his. There was no comfort in his tone, just truth. He stood to leave but paused at the door. For what it's worth, the general's got your back, more than you know. When he was gone, she sat in the quiet again, watching the rain bead on the window. The reflection that stared back wasn't the same woman who'd walked into the mess hall days ago. There was still pain, still fear, but under it something else, something solid. She reached up, touched her fatting bruise, and whispered to herself, "You did the right thing." The words sounded strange, like they belonged to someone else, but slowly they began to feel real. Across the base, in his dimly lit office, Roth received another message. This one wasn't from HQ. "Careful, General, you've made enemies. We suggest you remember your rank has limits." No signature, no sender, just a warning that smelled of cowardice. He set the paper down, exhaling through his nose. Then he looked at the framed photograph on his desk, a younger version of himself standing beside soldiers lost long ago. He whispered to them, not sure why. She stood alone. I won't let her stand alone again. Thunder rolled in the distance. The lights flickered. And for the first time in years, the base commander of Fort Haven didn't feel like a man in charge. He felt like a man standing at the edge of a storm, the kind that didn't come from the sky, but from people too afraid of truth. Outside, the flag whipped violently in the wind. Inside, Roth reached for the phone and made a call. "Get me the Inspector General's office," he said. "I'm filing a report, and this time they'll listen." As the line clicked and the rain kept falling, two lives, a soldier and her commander, became quietly linked by something stronger than rank or duty. Conscience. And in the quiet hum of thunder, both of them knew the real battle hadn't even started yet. Why do they punish those who tell the truth? That question lingered like smoke as Sergeant Claire Mendes stood outside the transport office, transfer orders in hand. 2 weeks had passed since Doyle's arrest. 2 weeks since justice had been promised and quietly smothered. The orders were brief: temporary reassignment to Outpost Kilo 9 for morale review and operational integration. The words sounded harmless, administrative. But every soldier knew what it meant. It meant get her out of sight. The clerk behind the counter didn't meet her eyes as he handed over the papers. "Transport leaves at 700, he mumbled. "Travel light." She nodded, said nothing, and walked out into the gray morning light. The base was quieter these days. Rain had turned the yard into mud. The same soldiers who once saluted her now avoided her gaze, some out of guilt, others out of fear. She didn't blame them. The military had its own way of teaching silence. As she crossed the yard, she spotted Lieutenant Harris near the motor pool. He saw the envelope in her hand and frowned. "They're moving you." "Reassignment," she said, forcing a smile. "Kilo 9. His jaw clenched. "That's a remote base. No active unit rotation. They're burying you." "I know." He stepped closer. "You can appeal it." "To who?" "The same people who closed the case." He didn't answer. She adjusted her duffel strap. "It's fine, Lieutenant. Maybe a little quiet will do me good." Her tone was steady, but her eyes gave her away. That same flicker of defiance she'd had the morning Roth called her forward in the mess hall. In the command office, General Roth was reading the same transfer memo. He'd received it at dawn, sealed with the division crest, stamped urgent. He'd read it 3 times, each one slower than the last. The message beneath the words was clear: back down. Major Cross entered with 2 folders under her arm. "You saw it." Roth nodded. "They're calling it a personnel rotation." "Of course they are," he muttered. "They always hide cowardice behind procedure." Cross hesitated. "Sir, if you push back on this, they'll make it formal. They could open an inquiry into your command fitness." He looked up sharply. "Let them." "Sir, I won't sign off on punishment disguised as transfer." Cross stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Then they'll sign it without you." He fell silent. For the first time in years, Roth felt the walls of hierarchy closing around him. He'd fought wars, led men into chaos, buried too many to count, but nothing had prepared him for this kind of battle, the one fought in offices, in whispers, in ink. He turned toward the window, rain streaking down the glass like cracks. She did the right thing, Major, and now they want to make her an example of why you shouldn't. Cross's voice softened. You can't save everyone, sir. He didn't look back. Maybe not, but I can damn well try to save the ones who still believe in me. Claire's last night at Fort Haven was a quiet one. She packed in silence photos, letters, a worn-out patch from her first deployment. Each item felt heavier than it should. When the knock came at her door, she half expected it. Roth stood there, raincoat draped over his shoulders, expression unreadable. Permission to enter. She nodded, of course, sir. He stepped inside, looking around the small dorm. Bare walls, folded sheets, the faint smell of coffee. It was the kind of space soldiers never really lived in, just occupied. I heard about the reassignment, he said. So did half the base, she replied quietly. He studied her for a moment. Do you understand why they're doing this? She met his gaze. Because I didn't stay quiet. He nodded once. They think if they move you, the story dies, but they've forgotten something. What's that? You survived worse than their paperwork. That almost made her smile, almost. He reached into his coat and placed a small envelope on her desk. It's not official, but it's a letter of commendation from me, personal record. Her fingers brushed the paper. Sir, It's not about rank or career. It's about truth. Someday, when someone asks what happened here, that paper will matter. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The room was filled with the sound of rain tapping against the window. Finally, she said, they'll come after you next. He smiled faintly. They already have. You're not afraid. He thought for a long moment before answering. Of them. No, of forgetting why I'm here, every day. She swallowed hard. Thank you, sir, for everything. He gave a single nod. Make them remember your name, Sergeant, not for what was done to you, but for what you did after. And then he was gone. Morning came gray and wet. The transport waited on the tarmac, a dull green convoy truck with faded numbers and a driver who didn't speak. Claire loaded her duffel and climbed aboard. As the vehicle rumbled to life, she looked back through the rain-streaked glass. Fort Haven was shrinking in the distance, the base where she'd been broken, and where she'd finally refused to stay broken. She pressed her palm to the window, whispered something to herself, and faced forward. The ride was long. Hours passed through stretches of forest and mud, the hum of the engine constant and hypnotic. Her thoughts drifted to Doyle, to Roth, to the faceless people in offices deciding her fate. By dusk, the truck rolled through the gates of Kilo 9. The outpost was small, 2 barracks, 1 operations shed, a rusted watchtower leaning slightly to one side, a forgotten corner of the military map. When she stepped off the truck, a young sergeant greeted her, his tone flat. You're the transfer from Haven. Yes. Room 4, mess is at 1800, don't expect much. He turned and walked away without another word. She stood there for a moment, breathing in the smell of damp earth and diesel. The silence here was different, thicker, the kind that didn't just surround you but seeped in. That night she unpacked in her new quarters. The cot creaked, the walls were bare, rain leaked faintly through a crack near the window. She lay awake, listening to the distant rumble of thunder. She wondered if Roth was still at Fort Haven, or if they'd already started dismantling everything he stood for. Back at Haven they had. Roth walked into the command room the next morning to find his name removed from the upcoming operations roster. A replacement had been appointed, temporarily, to oversee proceedings during an internal leadership evaluation. Major Cross looked defeated. They moved fast, she said. He scanned the memo, effective immediately. Then he exhaled through his nose. They think they can silence me with paperwork. Cross hesitated. Sir, maybe it's time to consider retirement. You've done your part. He looked at her, eyes tired but fierce. If I retire now, they win, and soldiers like Mendes disappear from memory. He paced slowly, every step deliberate. No, I'll file my report to the Inspector General, and if they bury it, I'll send it higher. Someone up there still remembers what honor means. Cross didn't argue. She just nodded, quietly proud even in her fear. As Roth sat behind his desk again, a thought crossed his mind, sharp, sudden. He reached for his pen, opened a fresh page, and began to write by hand. When silence is rewarded and courage punished, a command ceases to be honorable. It becomes something else entirely. He paused, then added one final line. History may forget our names, but it won't forget what we allowed. He signed it, not as a general, but as a man. At Kilo 9, dawn broke cold and pale. Claire woke to the sound of the wind whistling through the tower. She dressed, stepped outside, and breathed in the sharp air. The outpost felt abandoned, but she didn't mind. Isolation meant freedom for now. She began her duties without complaint. Patrol logs, maintenance checks, paperwork, simple, mechanical tasks that kept her mind from wandering too far. But as days turned into weeks, rumors began to drift even here, carried by couriers, whispered through secure calls. Fort Haven's commander under review. Roth might be removed. Each word cut deeper than the last. She stood by the fence one evening, watching the sun dip below the tree line, and whispered, "Hold your ground, sir." She didn't know if he could hear her, but somehow she believed he could. And in that dying light, the loneliness around her didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like purpose. Because sometimes silence isn't defeat. Sometimes it's the space where courage gathers its breath, waiting for its turn to speak again. Why do the people who tell the truth always end up alone? General Roth asked himself that as he stood in his empty office, a man stripped of title but not of resolve. It had been 27 years since he first wore the uniform. In those years he'd seen men fall to bullets, to fear, to orders that never should have been given. But this, being betrayed by the institution he had sworn to defend, this was a quieter kind of wound, the kind that didn't bleed but still hollowed you out. The letter of suspension lay on his desk, unsigned by him, yet final all the same. Effective immediately, General Alaric Roth is relieved of command pending administrative review. He traced the words with his finger once, then folded the paper and slid it aside. His uniform jacket hung on the wall behind him, its metals catching faint light from the window. They looked dull now, relics of a man who used to believe in clear lines between right and wrong. The door opened softly. Major Cross stepped in. "Sir, they've reassigned your quarters. You'll need to vacate before 1800. He nodded slowly. "They move quick when it suits them." Cross hesitated. "You should know there are officers who support you, quietly, but no one's willing to say it out loud." He looked at her. "Silence has always been the safest uniform, Major." She swallowed hard. "What will you do now?" "Write," he said. "Not for them, for the record, because truth has a strange way of finding daylight, even from a file they meant to bury." Cross nodded. She started to salute but stopped halfway. "It's been an honor, sir." He smiled faintly. "The honor's mine." When she left, he sat for a long while, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan. Then he reached for a blank notepad and began to write again, not reports, not appeals, but memories. Each line began the same. There was a soldier named Claire Mendes. Far to the north, outpost Kilo 9 was waking to another gray morning. Rain had turned to mist, clinging to the edges of the fences and the steel roofs. The world felt washed out, quiet, colorless. Claire laced her boots and stepped outside. Her breath came in small clouds. The outpost sat on the edge of nowhere, a listening station that hadn't heard much in years. Its only sound was the crackle of old radios and the occasional drone of a supply chopper cutting through the clouds. She stopped counting the days since her arrival. Routine kept her sane. Patrols, reports, cleaning weapons that rarely fired. The monotony was both comfort and punishment. She was standing by the comms tower when she heard the approaching vehicle. A military jeep, old model, engine coughing. It stopped near the main gate, and a tall man stepped out, wearing civilian clothes under a base jacket. He flashed credentials at the gate guard, who waved him through. Then he approached Claire. "Sergeant Mendes." "Yes." "Special Operations Liaison Marcus Vale. I'm here on assignment." "Assignment?" He handed her a folder. "Temporary security team formation. You're being attached." She frowned. "There's no active op at Kilo 9. "Not until now," he said. "Orders came from Division Command this morning." The words Division Command sent a chill through her. She opened the folder. Inside were reconnaissance photos of forest terrain, coordinates, and a brief summary. Routine recovery mission. Down drone. Possible date a breach. Routine, she thought, nothing ever was. Vale watched her read. "They picked you for a reason." She closed the file. "Because I'm disposable." He didn't deny it. By afternoon, the four-person recovery team was assembled. 2 corporals, Vale and Claire. They moved through rain-slick forest in silence, the hum of the portable scanner pulsing faintly with every step. The terrain was rough, visibility low. The mist felt alive, shifting like breath. After an hour, they found the wreckage. What was left of the surveillance drone scattered across a ravine, its wings twisted, its metal body half buried in mud. Claire knelt beside it, brushing off debris. This went down hard. No way this was a malfunction. Vale crouched beside her. "You're right. Look at the scorch marks, electromagnetic pulse signature." "Enemy jamming." "Maybe, or friendly fire that wasn't supposed to be friendly." Her stomach tightened. "Why send us instead of recovery specialists?" He met her eyes. "Because they didn't want specialists, they wanted silence." For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then a faint sound, a twig snapping, too deliberate. Claire's instincts flared. "We're not alone." Vale turned. "Positions." Figures moved through the mist, 3 of them, dark uniforms without insignia. Armed, silent. The first shot rang out, a crack swallowed by the fog. Claire dove behind the drone hull as bullets kicked up mud around her. One of the corporals went down, hit in the shoulder. "Contact front," she shouted, returning fire in controlled bursts. The air filled with the smell of gunpowder and wet soil. Vale moved to flank, firing short, precise shots until the attackers melted back into the fog. Then, silence again. No bodies, no tracks, just echoes. Claire's pulse hammered. Who the hell were they? Vale crouched beside her, scanning the tree line. Not insurgents, these were trained. She looked back at the shattered drone, realization dawning. This wasn't a recovery mission. "No," he said quietly, "it was a cleanup." Hours later, they returned to base with the wreckage secured and 1 wounded soldier stable. Claire filed her report with mechanical precision, omitting nothing, softening nothing. When she finished, Vale approached her at the mess table. "You should destroy that copy," he said softly. "I don't falsify reports." "You don't have to, someone else will." She looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "I've seen this before. Missions rewritten, evidence lost. If you're smart, you'll keep a personal copy somewhere safe." She stared at him. "Why tell me?" "Because I'm tired of pretending I don't see it," he said. "And because I heard about what happened at Fort Haven." Her breath caught. "You know about that?" Everyone does, he said quietly. The story travels fast, especially when it makes the brass nervous. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he added, for what it's worth, some of us are still on your side. She wanted to believe him, but belief was a luxury she'd stopped affording herself. Still, that night, she hid a digital copy of her mission log on a portable drive, tucking it beneath the loose floor panel under her cot. Then she lay back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady hum of rain on metal. Outpost Kilo 9 had become more than punishment. It was bait, and she was starting to think she wasn't meant to come back from it. Meanwhile, at Fort Haven, Roth's report had reached the Inspector General's office and disappeared. No acknowledgement, no receipt. Just silence. He'd expected resistance, but the complete absence of response felt colder than open rejection. It meant someone high up had intercepted it. He spent the day walking the perimeter as a civilian might, his uniform now stripped of rank insignia. Soldiers nodded out of habit, then quickly looked away when they remembered he was no longer in command. When night came, he returned to his quarters and sat by the window. He thought of Claire, of her resilience, her defiance, the quiet courage that had reignited something in him. He poured a small glass of whiskey, stared into it, and whispered, "You were right to speak. Now I'll speak for you." Then he opened his laptop and began typing, not another report, but an open statement, drafted to reach beyond the chain of command. He titled it, "The Cost of Silence." At Kilo 9, dawn broke sharp and cold. Claire woke to find her door slightly ajar. She hadn't left it that way. Her heart spiked. She reached for her sidearm, checked the corners, nothing. But when she looked down at the floor panel, it had been disturbed. She pried it open. The drive was gone. A chill crawled up her spine. Whoever had come in hadn't taken anything else. Just the evidence. She stood in the quiet room, rain dripping faintly through the roof, and felt something shift inside her, not fear, not anger, but a deep, settled resolve. They could take her rank. They could erase her file. But they couldn't unmake the truth. She looked out the window toward the misty tree line and whispered, "You're not burying me here." That same morning, hundreds of miles away, a secure email slipped through the defense network, unsigned, encrypted, and impossible to trace. It contained Roth's statement. And it wasn't addressed to headquarters. It was addressed to the press. The storm had begun. And somewhere between Fort Haven and Kilo 9, two soldiers, one broken, one betrayed, were about to remind the system that silence only works until someone decides to speak again. How fast does truth travel once it's free? Faster than orders. Faster than damage control. By the time the morning sun touched Fort Haven, General Roth's statement had already crossed 3 continents. The Cost of Silence, that was the title every headline used. A plain PDF, unsigned, timestamped 02, 13 hours, filled with language that cut through protocol like shrapnel. When the people we command are punished for honesty, we are no longer soldiers. We are administrators of fear. By 800, defense reporters had it. By 900, civilians did. And by noon, every newsfeed in the region carried the same grainy photo of Roth in his uniform beside the flag, eyes steady, expression unreadable. The story burned. At Kilo 9, Claire learned about it the way soldiers learn everything secondhand. A technician burst into the mess hall, waving his tablet. "Holy hell," he said, "you seeing this?" She looked up from her coffee, heart already tight. On the screen, whistleblower general accuses high command of cover-up at Fort Haven. Her name appeared halfway down the article, redacted but still obvious. Female NCO, survivor of internal assault, it read. Her stomach dropped. So this was what exposure felt like, not victory, not vindication, just a cold rush that left you hollow. The others at the table went quiet. Someone muttered, "That's her." She stood up without a word and walked out into the drizzle. Outside, the air smelled of wet iron and pine. She gripped the railing until her knuckles went white. He'd done it. Roth had actually done it. And now everything would burn. At Fort Haven, the brass descended like a storm. SUVs, escorts, men in suits who didn't salute anyone. By evening, Roth's quarters were sealed, his laptop confiscated. He sat calmly at a table in the interrogation wing, two officers opposite him, recorders blinking red. "General Roth," one said, "did you or did you not disseminate classified internal documents to unauthorized media outlets?" Roth looked at them evenly. "No." "You deny authorship of this document." "I wrote it," he said, "but I didn't leak it." "Then who did?" He smiled faintly. Maybe the truth finally learned how to send email. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. The older one glared. "You've jeopardized operational security, morale, and public trust." Roth leaned forward. "No, I've jeopardized your ability to hide behind them." The silence after that was heavier than any reprimand. They ended the session after an hour. Roth was placed under observation, not a cell, but close enough. He didn't mind. For the first time in months, he slept. 300 miles north, Claire sat on her bunk staring at the same article on a flickering monitor. The comment section below it was chaos. Accusations, praise, vitriol, disbelief. Half called her a hero. Half called her a liar. She closed the window, unable to look anymore. The outpost commander, Captain Reese, appeared at her door later that evening. "Command wants a statement," he said. "No. You don't get to say no." "I just did." He sighed. "Look, Sergeant, they're sending a transport. You're being recalled to Fort Haven for debrief." Her pulse quickened. Debrief or damage control? He didn't answer. When he left, she sat motionless for a long time. Then she began to pack, each movement mechanical. She'd spent years following orders. This time, she wasn't sure she would. The ride back south was tense. 2 MPs escorted her, polite, silent, armed. Outside the windows, rain blurred the world into streaks of gray. She thought of Roth, what they might be doing to him, what he might be thinking. She pictured his calm expression, the way he'd said start healing. Was this what healing looked like? When the convoy stopped for refuel, one of the MPs stepped away for a smoke. The other kept glancing at her reflection in the glass. Finally, he muttered, "For what it's worth, ma'am, some of us read what he wrote. Most of it made sense." She met his eyes. "Then why are you still guarding me?" He looked down. "Orders." That was the answer to everything. Back at Fort Haven, media drones hovered beyond the perimeter fence, their lenses blinking red. Soldiers tried to ignore them, but every conversation had changed. People spoke softer now, choosing their words like landmines. Major Cross was still at her desk, exhausted, hollow-eyed. She hadn't slept since the story broke. When Roth was escorted past her office, she rose. "Sir." The guard paused. Roth looked at her through the glass. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to that single look, gratitude and warning in equal measure. She pressed her hand to the window. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then kept walking. That night, a broadcast aired on every defense channel. A spokesperson from Central Command appeared behind a podium, voice calm, expression controlled. "The department is aware of unauthorized disclosures relating to internal disciplinary matters. We assure the public that all allegations are under review and that appropriate steps have been taken." It sounded like closure. It was. Within hours, leaks multiplied, emails, memos, even surveillance stills from the mess hall confrontation months ago. Someone inside had started feeding the press. By dawn, Roth's face was everywhere. And so was Claire. She arrived at Fort Haven under escort at 700. The gate guards didn't speak. The looks they gave her weren't cruel, just uncertain. The look soldiers give someone they're not sure they're allowed to respect. They led her to a holding room. Plain walls, a metal table, one flickering light. An officer entered, Colonel Henning, Internal Affairs. "Sergeant Mendes," he began, "this is not a disciplinary inquiry. It's a clarification meeting." "Clarification," she echoed. "Yes, we need to establish what you told General Roth, when and why." She folded her hands. "Everything I told him is in my original statement." "The one that disappeared," he said dryly. She stared at him. "You mean the one your office lost?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Careful, Sergeant, you're under oath." "So are you." The silence that followed was long and sharp. Finally, he leaned back. "You realize, of course, that this publicity damages the institution you claim to love." She met his gaze, voice steady. "No, Colonel, the damage was already there. The publicity just turned on the light." He studied her for a long moment, then closed the file. "You may go." When she stood, her legs felt like lead. But inside, something solidified. The fear was gone. Only resolve remained. That evening, she wandered the outer yard, trying to breathe again. The sunset burned crimson across the horizon, the same color as the bruises that had started all of this. She thought of the soldiers who'd looked away, of the ones who'd whispered support but never spoke aloud. And she thought of Roth, somewhere inside that compound, waiting for whatever came next. A voice called from behind her, "You shouldn't be out here." She turned, Major Cross. "I heard they finished with you," Cross said. "They did. And they wanted me to regret everything." Claire smiled faintly. "I didn't." Cross looked relieved, almost proud. He'd want to know that. "Where is he?" Cross hesitated. "They moved him off base this morning. Medical hold officially." Claire frowned. "Is he all right?" Cross exhaled. "He's alive, angry but alive." The wind tugged at their hair, carrying the faint echo of voices from the distant training field. Cross looked at her. "They won't stop until this fades, until people forget." "Then we remind them," Claire said softly. Cross studied her for a long moment. "You really think one sergeant and a disgraced general can change anything?" Claire's eyes were steady. "We already did. We made them talk." Later that night, a civilian reporter waiting outside the gate caught sight of Claire leaving the administration block. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. "Sergeant Mendes, did General Roth tell the truth? Were you the victim in his statement? Do you stand by his accusations?" She paused at the gate, rain beginning to fall again, microphones crowding her like bayonets. Her voice was calm, almost quiet. "I stand by anyone who chooses honesty over comfort," she said. "And I stand by every soldier who's ever been told to stay silent." Then she walked away, the cameras clicking like distant gunfire. In a hospital 2 cities away, Roth watched that clip from a small TV mounted on the wall. His arm was bandaged, hypertension episode, they said, though he knew stress by another name. When he saw her face on the screen, his lips curved into the smallest smile. "She's still standing," he murmured. The nurse looked up. "Sir." "Nothing." He leaned back, closing his eyes, listening to the rain against the window. Somewhere inside that sound, he heard something he hadn't felt in months: hope. Maybe he'd lost his rank. Maybe they'd erase his name from history. But she was out there, unbroken. And that meant it hadn't been for nothing. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. News anchors debated, officials deflected, and the world, for the briefest moment, paid attention. But beneath the noise, in every barracks and briefing room, something subtle began to shift. Soldiers whispered her name with quiet respect. Officers hesitated before signing false reports. And somewhere, deep within the machinery of the military, conscience flickered like a pilot light refusing to die. The storm wasn't over. It had only just begun to change direction. Because truth, once spoken, doesn't retreat. It waits, it watches, and sooner or later, it demands to be answered. When does survival become surrender? That question followed General Roth through every corridor of the rehabilitation ward. The place smelled of antiseptic and rain. Nurses moved quietly, orderlies spoke in murmurs. On his bedside table lay a thin folder stamped confidential settlement proposal. Inside were a few simple lines. Retire with honors. Sign the non-disclosure agreement. The incident will be deemed resolved. A pen waited beside the papers, small, harmless, decisive. He picked it up, turning it between his fingers. Retire with honors. The phrase tasted metallic. He'd watched too many soldiers retire with medals that covered scars no one wanted to see. The door opened. Major Cross entered, eyes ringed from sleepless nights. They'll reinstate your pension, she said softly. Full benefits, quiet exit. Roth looked at her, and the report. Erased all of it. He set the pen down. So that's the price of comfort, forgetting. Cross hesitated. Sir, they'll bury you if you don't. They'll make you a cautionary tale. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's what's needed, a warning carved deep enough to be remembered. She swallowed hard. At least think about it. I have, he said, every day since Fort Haven. She started to reply, then stopped when she saw the look in his eyes, the same look he'd worn before every impossible mission. Determined, calm, fatalistic. 200 miles away, Sergeant Claire Mendes sat in a government office with a lawyer she didn't trust. A camera recorded everything. The walls were painted the color of surrender, off-white, sterile, harmless. Across the table, a colonel from public affairs smiled with professional sympathy. You've been through a great deal, Sergeant. The department wants to help you move on. Claire folded her hands. Move on. He slid a document toward her. Non-litigation agreement. You'll receive a commendation for service integrity and a private settlement for emotional distress. And in return, you'll acknowledge that General Roth's letter represented personal opinion, not verified fact. You'll refrain from public comment. She stared at the page. You want me to say he lied? Not lied, he said quickly. Misunderstood. The lawyer beside her whispered, take it, it protects you. Claire's voice was low. From what? The truth? The colonel's smile tightened. From yourself. Something in her snapped, quietly. She pushed the papers back across the table. I'm a soldier, she said, not a witness to be silenced. The colonel sighed. You're making a mistake. She stood. So did a lot of men before Roth decided to stop looking away. And she walked out, leaving the camera running, the colonel starring, the pen untouched. That night she sat in a cheap motel near the airfield, the settlement letter crumpled in her bag. Outside, neon flickered in puddles, jets rumbled overhead. She turned on the small TV, another panel debate, her name blurred by legal order. A reporter said, sources confirm the whistleblower general is expected to retire this week. She switched it off. The silence after felt heavier. Her phone buzzed once, unknown number, one message. He's still fighting. No signature, but she knew who had sent it, Cross. She stared at the screen, a strange ache blooming behind her ribs. In the hospital, Roth waited for midnight. The lights dimmed, monitors beeped softly. He slipped out of bed, pulled on his uniform jacket, no rank, just the fabric, the weight of habit, and sat by the window. Outside, rain painted the glass. He thought of the first day he'd seen her in that mess hall, the silence, the bruises, the moment he realized how far the army had drifted from its own oath. He reached for his notebook and began writing again, slower this time. Leadership is not granted by rank. It is earned by conscience. He stopped, stared at the words, and whispered, "If they erase this, then they'll have to erase me with it." Morning came with headlines. General ROTH refuses to sign deal. Investigation REOPNED. The story reignited overnight, brighter, angrier. Soldiers from multiple bases posted anonymous statements online, confirmation of abuse, cover-ups, silence. It was no longer about one sergeant. It was a reckoning. At Fort Haven, protesters gathered beyond the fence, veterans among them holding cardboard signs. Truth is loyalty. Inside, command went into lockdown. Major Cross found herself summoned by a panel of generals. One asked, "Does he intend to retract?" She met their eyes. "No, sir, he intends to be believed." When she left the room, her hands were shaking. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure who she served anymore. Claire boarded a civilian shuttle bound south. She didn't tell anyone. No escort this time, no orders. Just a destination, the hospital where they kept him. The attendant recognized her from the news but said nothing. People had learned, perhaps, that some stories were sacred. Through the window she watched the horizon blur, fields giving way to city lights. Her reflection looked older than she remembered. Not broken, just tempered. By evening she reached the hospital gate. Security stopped her until a nurse confirmed the name. Room 314. She walked the corridor slowly, heart hammering harder than it had under fire. He looked smaller in the bed, pale but steady. When he saw her, he smiled, that same quiet, knowing curve of the mouth. "Sergeant Mendes." "Sir." He gestured to the chair. "I heard you turned down their offer." "So did you." "Guess insubordination's contagious." She laughed softly, then fell quiet. The machines beeped between them like measured breaths. "They'll come after you harder now," he said. "I know. You regret it." She shook her head. "No, I just wish it didn't have to hurt this much." He nodded. "Truth always hurts before it heals." She hesitated. "What happens now?" He looked toward the window, where rain streaked like veins of light. "Now, we wait for them to decide whether to destroy us or to listen." She frowned. "And if they choose the first?" "Then we outlast them." For a while they said nothing. Just the hum of the monitors, the smell of rain, the quiet bond between two people who'd already lost everything except their conviction. The next morning, Cross visited. She found them both awake, coffee cups on the windowsill, the early sun finally breaking through. "Command issuing a statement," she said. "They can't suppress it anymore. Public pressure's too high. They're launching an external review." Roth's expression didn't change, but Claire saw the faint exhale, the release of months of tension. Cross added quietly, "They'll spin it, of course, call it reform, but it's something." Roth nodded. "Sometimes change doesn't arrive like thunder. Sometimes it whispers its way in." He turned to Claire. "You should disappear for a while, find quiet." She smiled faintly. "I've had enough quiet." Cross looked between them. "They'll want a press statement from you, Sergeant, maybe testimony before committee." Claire considered it. "If I speak again, it'll be for the ones who can't." Roth's eyes softened. "Then speak." Days passed. The story spread beyond borders. Veterans wrote open letters. Young cadets quoted her name during ethics lectures. A foundation quietly began offering legal aid to service members reporting abuse. The military machine hadn't fallen, but it had flinched, and that was something. Roth spent his recovery reading every letter that arrived, anonymous thank yous, confessions, apologies. Each one proof that the echo had reached further than he'd imagined. One night Cross brought him a sealed envelope. "Official notification," she said. He opened it slowly. Charges dropped, case closed. No apology, no admission, just bureaucratic retreat. He looked up at her. "That's how victory looks." "It's the only kind they know," she said. He smiled, weary but satisfied. Then we'll take it. Outside on the hospital balcony, Claire watched the city lights flicker below. Cross joined her, leaning on the rail. You ever think about quitting? Cross asked. Every day, Claire said. But then I remember why I joined, to protect people, even if now that means protecting them from each other. Cross nodded. He changed something in them, you know. So did you. So did you, Cross countered. They stood there a long while, silent, the air cool and alive with possibility. Inside, Roth sat alone, pen in hand. He added one last line to his notebook before closing it for good. Sometimes the mission isn't to win. It's to endure long enough for someone braver to arrive. He looked out the window and saw them, two women, one soldier, one officer, standing side by side beneath a clearing sky. He smiled. Looks like they already did. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the morning light spill across the room. Somewhere beyond the hospital gates, a news anchor's voice carried over a car radio. Today marks the first independent review of internal conduct within the Defense Forces in over 20 years. A driver listening wiped a tear from his cheek and whispered, "About damn time." For the first time in a long while, Fort Haven stood quiet without shame. The flag moved gently in the wind. No one looked away from it anymore. In the stillness, the lesson remained, not written on stone or metal, but etched into memory. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. How long does it take for truth to outlive its witnesses? Sometimes a lifetime, sometimes just one heartbeat longer than silence. 5 years later, Fort Haven looked different. The old concrete walls had been repainted, the mess hall windows replaced. There were new recruits in fresh uniforms. None of them knew the name Mendes until the instructors spoke it in ethics briefings. In the front hallway, a framed quote hung above the duty board. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the refusal to look away. General Alaric Roth. No ceremony had ever unveiled it. It simply appeared one morning, nailed into the wall, unsigned, as if the base itself had decided to remember. On the northern coast, the wind off the sea carried salt and radio chatter. Claire Mendes walked the perimeter of the Veterans Rehabilitation Center where she now worked. The badge on her chest read Counselor. She hadn't worn rank insignia in years, but every soldier who met her stood a little straighter, even before they knew why. Inside the ward, the air smelled of coffee and antiseptic, different from the hospital years ago, yet the same quiet rhythm of healing. "Morning, Sarge," a young corporal called from the weight room doorway. He still called her that, even though she'd told them not to. "Morning, Corporal, you sleep." He shrugged, "Nightmares again." She nodded toward the treadmill. "Run it out, we all did." He smiled faintly and obeyed. Claire moved on, checking charts, offering small words, listening more than she spoke. That had become her discipline, the art of listening without judgment, because she knew what unspoken things weighed most. When the shift ended, she sat on the cliffs overlooking the gray ocean, notebook in hand. The pages were full of names, soldiers she'd met, helped, lost. At the bottom of each page she wrote one line, still standing. The wind tugged at her hair, the sea roared below, and for the first time in years she felt at peace. Then her phone buzzed, a message. "He's in town, asked for you." No name, but she didn't need one. Roth lived quietly now in a small coastal house not far from the rehab center. Retired technically, but reporters still sent letters, young officers still sought advice, and he still wrote. Stacks of notebooks filled his shelves, each labeled by year, Aftermath I, Aftermath II, and so on. When Claire arrived, he was sitting on the porch, a blanket over his knees, mug steaming beside him. His hair had gone completely white, his face lined but steady. "Sergeant," he said. "General." They smiled. No need for ranks anymore. They were just titles borrowed from another lifetime. She sat opposite him, the sea wind carrying the faint cry of gulls. "Didn't think you'd still be here," she said. He chuckled softly. "Couldn't leave the ocean. It's honest. Never pretends to be calm when it's not." She nodded, understanding too well. He studied her. "You found your place." "Trying to, helping the ones who come back broken." He gestured toward the horizon. "You always were better at rebuilding than destroying." She smiled. "Learned that from you." They sat in silence for a while, watching the surf crash against the rocks below. Time stretched gently between them, two survivors of a war that hadn't needed guns. Eventually she asked, "Do you ever regret it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead he took a sip of coffee, eyes distant. "Regret the fight. No, regret that it had to be fought at all every day." He looked at her. "They fixed some of it, you know, new oversight office, anonymous reporting, small steps but real." "I heard," she said. "Some of the recruits call it the Roth Clause." He laughed once quietly. "Fancy name for basic decency." "You started it." He shook his head. "No, Sergeant, you did, I just followed." The words hit her harder than she expected. For years she'd carried guilt, guilt for speaking, for staying silent, for surviving when others hadn't. Hearing him say that loosened something inside her, something that had refused to heal. As the afternoon faded, a young soldier approached the house, a courier in crisp uniform. He saluted. "Sir, ma'am, I was asked to deliver this." Roth took the envelope. When the courier left, he turned it over, Department of Defense letterhead. Inside, a short statement of recognition. Official, cold, but unmistakable. In acknowledgement of actions that led to institutional reform and protection of service members. The department awards General Alaric Roth and Sergeant Claire Mendes the Distinguished Service Cross for moral conduct. Claire blinked. Moral conduct, didn't know they had a medal for that. He smiled. "They don't, they made one." She laughed, shaking her head. "Guess miracles come in paperwork now." He folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope and set it aside. "Keep yours," he said. "I've got enough metal gathering dust." "Maybe frame it next to the quote at Haven," she teased. He looked at her surprised. "You've seen it." "They teach it to the new recruits." That brought real warmth to his eyes. Then maybe it was worth it. Evening settled, gold fading to blue. Claire lit a small lamp on the porch. They talked about ordinary things, coffee brands, the stubborn gull that stole sandwiches, the weather rolling in from the west. But beneath it all, they both knew this was their last real meeting. He was slowing down. She could see it in his hands, his breath. And she had work waiting, lives to mend. Before she left, he handed her one of his notebooks. The cover was worn, the pages thick with cramped handwriting. "What's this?" "Volume 10, he said, "ends today." She opened it to the last page. The final line read, "Justice is not a verdict. It's a memory kept alive by those who refuse to forget." She closed it carefully. "I'll keep it safe." "I know you will." 2 weeks later, Roth passed quietly in his sleep. No parade, no salute, just the sound of the sea outside his window. Claire was there for the small memorial, standing in uniform again for the first time in years. Cross was beside her. So were a dozen soldiers she'd never met. Young, serious, carrying the same look Roth once wore, that mix of duty and conscience. When the chaplain finished speaking, Claire stepped forward. She didn't have notes, didn't need them. "People think courage is loud," she said. "Maybe sometimes it is. But the kind I learned from him was quiet. It was paperwork no one wanted to file, conversations no one wanted to have. It was showing up for someone when the easy thing was to walk away." Her voice trembled once, then steadied. He used to say, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." He proved that, and I hope we remember how. The wind caught her words and carried them out toward the waves. When the service ended, She placed the worn notebook on the wooden box that held his ashes. Then she saluted, one last time. Months passed. Life returned to motion. At the rehab center, new faces arrived, others left whole again. On weekends, she walked the cliffs, sometimes alone, sometimes with Cross, always with the same notebook in her bag. One evening, she opened it again, added her own line beneath his final one. And sometimes, if you stand long enough, the world finally turns toward you. She closed it and smiled. The wind off the sea was cold, but it felt clean. Years later, long after both their names had faded from headlines, the Army Museum in the Capitol added a small exhibit, nothing grand, just a corner under the section titled Integrity in Service. 2 photographs, 1 letter, and below them a brass plaque that read, "The Haven Reform, 2089." Because 2 soldiers remembered their oath when others forgot. Visitors rarely lingered there. Most came for the uniforms and medals. But every so often, a young cadet stopped to read the plaque twice, quietly, as if committing it to memory. Somewhere far beyond the museum walls, the ocean still broke against the cliffs. And somewhere in the hearts of those who served, the echo of that story kept breathing, proof that truth, once spoken, never really dies. Voiceover final lines. The hardest battles are the ones no one sees. They happen behind doors, between heartbeats, inside the choice to stay silent or to stand. And when the bruises fade, what remains isn't the pain. It's the strength that was there all along. The screen fades to black. Rain falls softly on a flag that refuses to stop moving. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.